All right, welcome to our WFC Devo. It's been a snowy week. It's been pretty neat, a little bit different than the weather we're used to getting around here. I am recording this from the house. Laptop at work won't handle recording a video like this. So we got kids home doing schoolwork. We got my wife is working actually right behind me at a table. Her own work going on back there. So I'm wearing a headset. So I still got better sound this way. Our other mics just don't work as well as this one. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit. Was able to attend, I guess you could say attend. Uh, they have these preacher conference things at Harding every year, and I've gone to the last couple of them. And this year, a little bit different. They were going to have it online so you could see it online, and decided to do that this year. Thought that might be a good way to go without having to be there and the extra travel time, because it's an all day event, so we have to get up early, and I get to go with Mr. Paul. I did miss the visit we got to have on the drive up and down, but this year they had it online, so I was able to sit in front of a computer all day Tuesday and listen to that lecture, class time, basically all day about the book of Job this year. And I thought I might just share a little bit about what we learned. And it's just always good to go back and study these Old Testament books again. Always enjoy learning more, looking at it from a little bit different perspective. And so the one of the presenters was presenting it a little bit different than what I was used to. Sometimes we look at Job's friends and we look at them and think, maybe they just don't get it. Maybe they're presented in a light that they're not doing what they're supposed to, that they're trying to push Job to do something he's not supposed to do. And I wanted to look at that again and see what we could find out. And my question for us today is, could you be a friend of Job? And I wrote a brief bulletin article for this as well this week. If it's what's on your mind, it's easy to get into a role, and so that's what I was doing. We had a class about it, I wrote a bulletin article about it, and then here I'm going to share some of that with y'all tonight. So if you look at the book of Job, of course, it's an Old Testament book. Not 100% sure when it was written, or even, to be honest, who wrote it. Interesting book, though. The way it presents material is a little bit different than some of the other books we see. A lot of poetry in the book of Job. And it gives us this introduction to Job in chapter 1. So I hope you have your Bible. Go ahead and turn to Job chapter 1. If you can, I'll go ahead and read it for us too. It says, in the land of Uz lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and he owned 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. His sons used to take turns holding feasts in their homes, and they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. When a period of feasting had run its course, Job would send and have them purified. Early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. This was Job's regular custom. So Job is a wealthy man. I mean, this is he's got everything. He's got adult kids. He's got 7 sons, which is the perfect number of kids, boys to have. But even beyond that, the number 10 is the perfect number of children to have. So he's got all of these animals, these servants. He is at the pinnacle. He's a millionaire basically. And so, but beyond that, he is also a very religious man. He's a man who cares about God and staying right with God. And he's so worried that he even goes above and beyond and makes sure that anytime that his kids are out doing some things, and it doesn't tell us that they're doing stuff that's wrong. It doesn't imply that really even. It's just that he's thinking, just in case they've done something wrong, I'm going to make sure and sacrifice for him. We're going to have this worship service basically where he invites them all to come in and they sacrifice these animals. And this isn't cheap because he's sacrificing an animal for each one of these kids. So each time this happens, it's 10 of his animals. So he's a concerned parent. And that introduces us to this person named Job. But beyond that, most of us are probably aware of what happens next. And Job goes through tragedies. And it's not that just one thing happens, but it's like everything that could go wrong happens to him, and it all comes down almost in one day on top of him. He goes through, and there's this little prologue introduction of sort of the behind the scenes glimpse, and we see this scene of heaven, and God is there, and this person comes in. And it in our Bible, most of our translations are going to say Satan, and it's probably better as a title, the accuser. And the teacher brought out that we're based on this translation. This may be a separate person from whom we think of as Satan in the New Testament. I'm not going to get into all that because I just don't. I'm not the Greek scholar, so. But this accuser comes into the presence of God, and he's talking about Job, and actually God brings up Job. Says, "Look, have you seen my servant Job and how righteous he is?" But in that discussion, it is decided that Job will be tested. Basically, that he's got all this stuff, all these blessings. What happens when you take those blessings away? And so, as you go through and you get into the end there of chapter 1, starting in verse 13, we see that his oxen and his donkeys are taken, his servants are killed. In verse 16, his sheep are taken. And actually, this is a little different one. This one, his sheep and his servants are burned up from fire that falls from the sky. And the one servant who escapes actually blames this on God and says that it's God that did this. Actually, I want to look at that. It says, while he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I am the only one who's escaped to tell you. So he's already thinking in his mind that this is God's doing. And then in verse 17, he goes on, and another messenger comes in, and it says the Chaldeans formed raiding parties, and they came in, they took all your camels, and then they put all your servants to the sword, and they killed them. And then, so he's lost all of his wealth. He's lost all of his servants. That's all gone all of a sudden. Everybody, that took care of his animals is dead. And then while they're still speaking in verse 18, sort of like, the absolute huge hammer comes smashing down and just crushes Job. And the messenger comes in and talks about his sons and daughters were at a feast, and the winds from the desert blew in, and it crushed the house that they were in, and all of them are dead. All the servants that were there serving them, apparently. And only this one servant is freed and comes to tell Job that his family's dead. His sons and daughters are gone. I don't know if you've ever had friends and family who have gone through tragedy. If you haven't yet, most likely you will. There's just, it's hard to get through life if you're not just an isolationist where you're just alone all the time. As a human being, and we've got relationships, we have people that we care about, we have friends and family, and things happen. And it's difficult for us at times to know what to do. I don't know if you're like me. My first impulse is I want to go do something. I want to say the right thing. I want to make sure that they're okay. I want to comfort them. I want to fix it. That's not all the way it works. And knowing what to say and how to say it and even when to say it, when to go over. There's times when there's things that happen and I'm like, if it was me, well, at that first instant, I would really just want my closest family to be with me. And then after that time, then it would be okay for more people to come and more people to come. As far as uh, there's some things that just happen, and it's very very intimate. Is very much uh, you want the people that you feel the most comfortable with, that are going through the same thing with you. Because, like I said, if it's a family tragedy, a death in the family, man, that's when you want just the family there. So I second guess myself. Okay, so when I'm the outsider, I'm the friend looking in. Like, well, should I go over now? Should I wait a day? Should I go ahead and call them and then maybe show up tomorrow? All these questions start going through my mind of what could I do? What should I do? Uh, and I'll address that some in the bulletin article. It's like the question is, I want to help, but I don't know what to do. It's often difficult to know in a given situation what to do, what to say, how to treat that other person. Uh, our default here in the South, of course, is give them food. It's sort of funny how we do that. You think about it. Anything that goes on, even if it's a good thing, if it's a birthday party, a baby shower, well, then you get into the stuff like a death in the family, some sort of disaster. If somebody's power's out, or if their house burns down, well, the first thing that thinks in our mind is let's give them food. Let's give them food, and it's just sort of what we do. But when we have someone in our life that faces a tragedy, we often find it difficult to know what to do, what to say. We want to fix the problem. We want to do something, and we want to help. But the question is this, what can I do? And I think we don't realize that we're not alone in that at that time. Um, Sometimes I think we feel overwhelmed, and we want the right answer, and then a lot of times there's just not one. Uh, we can't make things right. For Job, I mean, he's lost all of his wealth. He's lost his kids, his wife, or not his wife, his kids, his sons and daughters. That's what I was trying to say, and all of his servants. And so, if you're a friend of Job and you hear about that, what do you do? I mean, you can't give him his wealth back. You can't bring his kids back. So what do you do? And Job has friends. He is not alone. He has those that care about him. And at the very end of chapter 2, starting in verse 11, we find out, yeah, he does have friends, and they do care. And so chapter 2, verse 11 says, when Job's 3 friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naphthalite, that's a hard one for me to say. Not only does he have friends, but they're varied. They're not just from one family, one group. There's different tribes that he's talking about here. When they heard about all the troubles that had come upon Job, they set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go sympathize with him and comfort him. So, I mean, we don't know how much time is going on in this, but they hear about what happens. So somebody has to bring news from Job, his family. Somebody finds out about what's going on, and word spreads, which we know that happens even today, especially things that are bad. As soon as somebody finds out, that's gossip. That's when everybody's got to tell everybody. Well, this message gets back to these friends, and they make a plan. I mean, some messages have to go back and forth between them because they make a plan to meet together at a certain place, a certain time, and go visit Job. And so when they get all this together, they go together to meet Job, and they want to comfort him, it says specifically. Now, verse 12 says, when they saw him, so they've traveled to where Job is, when they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was. So they're coming along, and we assume walking. To be honest, most of the time, that's how they traveled at that time. and they get close enough that I guess they're see his yard or something where Job is, and they can't even hardly recognize him. And I don't know if you've seen people in grief, and you're used to seeing them on normal days, and then all of a sudden you see them and you catch them when they're in a moment of deep grief, and it just changes your face and the way they look. And Job isn't taking care of himself. I skipped over that part, but when all this happens, uh, back in verse 20, after he finds out that his kids have been killed, he gets up in chapter 1, verse 20. It says, "At this, Job got up and tore his robe, shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground in worship and said, 'Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised.' In all of this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing." So beyond even looking bad, because he's overwrought with anguish, but he takes time to shave his head, and he rips his robes, and we find out later that he's sitting in a pile of ash, so he's probably dirty and stuff too. So when his friends arrive, they can barely recognize him. But then when they see him and they see, oh, that's Job, their first reaction is to mourn, to weep, to tear their robes. And then they do, to me, an amazing thing. And I think this is where sometimes we get caught up in wanting to get there. And as soon as we get there, we want to say the right thing. We want to fix the problem. And these friends of Job, they just sit down on the ground. They sit down with him where he is. They don't try to comfort. They don't try to drag him in and clean him up and put him in bed. They just sit down where he is. And then they sit there. And this is just mind-boggling to me, because I've sat with somebody for long periods of time. But for them, they sit down, and it says specifically for 7 days and 7 nights. So they spend time with him. And okay, we don't know what happens during the 7 days and 7 nights. I mean, practically in my mind, I'm like, well, where did they go to the bathroom? Did they sleep during this time? Surely they had to go to sleep. Was somebody trying to feed them, bringing them meals? As far as I understand it, you had to have water at least during that period of time. 7 days is too long for humans to go without water. Are they taking turns? Maybe some of them sitting with Job and some of them going and taking a break and getting something to eat and sleeping and coming back. Or that's my practical side, because I've been through some of that. My mother had cancer, and so I came in and I was trying to help Dad, and we were taking turns. One person would go and one person would sit with her. So I understand the practical side of how that wears you down, and you get tired, even if you're not doing anything. You're just being there and you're sitting there. Not only did they do that, but they were able to sit there in silence. Man, that's really hard, to be honest. You have somebody who is going through something, and like I said, our brain is sitting there, and we're wanting to fix it. And they just sit there in silence. They don't say anything. They don't try to immediately, give him comfort in through words. The comfort that they and that was their intention when they set out on this, is we're going to go and comfort him. But yet when they get there, all they do is they're just with him, and they sit and they're silent. And I know I'm harping on that, but that's amazing to me. If you're a talker, could you sit still and be quiet for 7 days? Most people can't do that. They don't like silence. To sit and be quiet for even a minute for most people is just anguish. I mean, I've done that experiment with people, and just we sit down and most people can't stand it, sitting with somebody and not talking. After this 7 days, though, even beyond that, they wait for Job to speak first. Job begins to speak in chapter 3. After all this, and we, like I said, we don't know exactly the time periods between when all this starts to happen to him. We know that I got this out of order. I left a part out. So when Job goes through this and he learns about his animals and his servants dying, his kids dying, and then in verse or chapter 2, it started off and it said on another day. So the angels are gathered back together. The tester comes back in, the accuser, I mean, and so that's after that they take away Job's health, and he's covered with sores from head to toe. And verse 7, so Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and afflicted Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. And so I forgot to put that part in. And then all this stuff has to happen. And then the friends find out about it. And then they travel to go see Job. So like I said, we're not sure how long all that part took. And then they sit for 7 days. And then Job starts to talk. As I said, it's just when you get down to it and you think about it seriously, would you even hear of anybody doing something like this today? Would if you found out your friend had gone through a hard time, could you drop everything you're doing, everything in your life, leave and go sit with them in silence for a week? So we give Job's friends a hard time because of some of the things that come later. But to be honest, these guys are good friends. They give up everything for their week and more and go and stay with Job and just sit there for a week in silence. But Job begins to speak. And when you hear the words that are coming out of Job's mouth after this week of him sitting there and going through this anguish, and the words that come out are very dark. And he goes through, he says here, it says, after this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. And he goes into this long poetry and he says, may the day of my birth perish, and the night it was said a boy is born. That day, may it turn to darkness. May God above not care about it. May no light shine upon it. May darkness and the deep shadow claim it once more. May a cloud settle over it. May blackness overwhelm its light. That night may thick darkness seize it. May it not be included among the days of the year, nor be entered in any of the months. So basically he's saying, let that entire day be just stricken from existence, just absolutely wiped out. And that way I won't ever have been born. And he keeps going for this whole chapter, just talking in a very dark way, very much that I wish I never had existed. And I don't know if you've ever been with somebody like that, who's going through a period of time like that. It's overwhelming, just sit there and hear that person that you care about talk about themselves that way. And here these friends are, and the first thing out of Job's mouth after they've been sitting with him for a week is the fact that he wants to wipe out his very existence, that he no longer wants to even be around and to exist anymore. And Eliphaz is one of his friends, and he speaks up first. Each one of them sort of takes turns, and they go back and forth between each friend and Job. But Eliphaz is interesting in the way he starts. And like I said, they sort of get a bad rap, but he starts off by saying, in chapter 4, it says, then Eliphaz the Temanite replied, if someone ventures a word with you, will you be impatient? So he asked the question, is it okay for me to speak? Can I talk to you? Will you listen? Will you hear me? I mean, and that's the thing. A lot of times people just aren't in a position where they can hear you when they're going through some of these dark things and their life is in turmoil. They have to be willing to listen, to hear you. Sometimes they just aren't in that position. I know, I mean, from my own personal experience in counseling and different things, somebody has to be ready to hear. Um, so he asked him, it's like, if somebody was to speak, if I was to venture some words, would you be impatient? Would you at least listen to me? And he even says, what you've just said, who can keep from speaking? I mean, after hearing what you've just said, I mean, they sat there for a week, and then Job unloads this big load of darkness about how he hates himself, basically, and his life. It's like, I have to speak. Let me speak. And verse 3 says, think how you have instructed many, how you have strengthened feeble hands. Your words have supported those who stumbled. You have strengthened faltering knees. And he's pointing out to them how their life his life really has had meaning. He has been the one that's been there for others when they have struggled. And he's reminding him of that. In fact, he goes on and he talks about how he's like, but now trouble comes to you and you are discouraged. It strikes you and you are dismayed. He's just like, you're going through something. You've been there with other people and you've seen other people have to go through some of these trials. And then, here you are, and you're in the middle of this, and you were able to help them when they went through it. And he reminds them, should not your piety be your confidence and your blameless ways your hope? You've lived the life that God wants you to live, basically, is what he's saying. Shouldn't you put hope in that? And he goes on and he talks about a lot of other things. And like I said, some of he's trying. That's the thing about, I think a lot of these people sort of dismiss this. And I think I've been guilty of that too in a class that I've done. You want to present these friends and well, they're trying to get Job and to admit that he's sinned and that he's wrong. And his wife even, told him to curse God and die back in chapter 2 or whatever there. And but I think if we look at it through the light of these people are caring, they're human, and they're trying through their own understanding, their own flawed understanding to help. Maybe that would give us a little bit of incentive to try our best to help too, even if it's not perfect. We're going to try to help our friends, to reach out to those people who've gone through tragedies, and to show them love and compassion, even if it's not perfect, even if we don't know the answer. If nothing else, like Job and his friends, we can at least be there with them. We can at least show them that we care by at least sitting with them, even if it's just in silence. So there's a lot to study, and I'm not going to keep you any longer today. I know this is running long. I just want you to make sure and think about that as you're going through life and we face these trials and we see others in their life and they're struggling and going through these difficulties. I may not know what to do. I might not know the right answer, but I'm called to show God's love. And that may be just being there. It may be a phone call or a text to let them know I'm thinking about you. I'm praying for you. I care. So don't let that fear of not knowing the right answer or not knowing what to do keep us from doing, because we're going to make mistakes. We may try to jump in there a little bit too quick sometimes to say what we think. Sometimes all it is us sitting and listening to them speak. They let Job go first, and they let him talk. They couldn't hold it in forever, and they wanted to encourage him, to remind him. In chapter 5, he goes on. I will point this out real quick. In chapter 5, he goes on to give some really good advice. his friend here, Job's friend, he says, he basically says, who are you going to call on? And he says, people are born into trouble. And in verse 8, he says, but if it were I would appeal to God. I would lay my cause before him. He performs wonders that cannot be fathomed, miracles that cannot be counted. He bestows rain on the earth and sends water upon the countryside. The lowly he sets on high, and those who mourn are lifted to safety. And it keeps on going there. But he at least points him in the right direction. And that may be all we can do. Job had to do it for himself. And in the end, God has to come and speak to Job. But it may be that, like I said, we can't necessarily fix it. If we were one of Job's friends, we couldn't bring his family back. We couldn't give him all of his livestock back. We couldn't bring his servants back to life. But they did what they could. And they were there with him. They provided comfort. They pointed him to God. And they encouraged him to remember the good about his own self, to try to steer him away from that darkness. And they did their best. Okay. They weren't perfect, but they did try. And I think that's if you want to take anything away from the book of Job, I think that's what we should take away from. I don't think it's that we should really focus too much on Job's suffering and why it happened. And I think that's not the point. But what can you do for those around you when you see someone struggling? Show God's love. We're going to quit there, and I appreciate you guys tuning in for us tonight, and I hope that your week's going well, and hopefully we'll be back on track next week. I know this has been a weird month with the school asking us not to do anything, and then us getting permission to do something, and then this weather. Last week we had ice, and then this week has just been solid snow. So if we do have service Sunday, I hope you will come and worship with us on Sunday morning, 9:30 or 11. And then we're supposed to start back with our classes, which we're supposed to also have been started back this week, but we're postponed until next week. So remember that next Wednesday. Hopefully we'll be back in class at 6:30. So keep that in mind. And for sure, if anybody needs anything, give me a call, and we'll try to help you out any way we can. Until next time, we'll be praying for you.